He sat alone in the dim light of a dorm room that smelled faintly of burnt circuits and stale coffee. The walls, cracked with years of student neglect, echoed with the silence of someone too obsessed to notice the world around him. Larry Page's eyes burned from staring at the flickering monitor, the hum of the machine in front of him sounding less like technology and more like a whisper from something alive, restless and dangerous. He was 20-something, just another anonymous figure lost in the academic labyrinth of Stanford. And yet, he was not. There was something in him that did not sleep, something gnawing at the edges of his mind. Every book he read, every lecture he attended, only sharpened the wound of knowing the world was drowning in chaos, chaos made of information. Billions of pages, scattered, unindexed, buried in the darkness of the internet. To most, it was noise. To him, it was a monster. And monsters demanded to be caged. But Larry did not look like a conqueror. He looked fragile. A quiet man with a nervous edge, haunted by an obsession no one else could see. His classmates chased internships, steady jobs, the illusion of safety. He chased ghosts made of numbers, links, and algorithms. He remembered his childhood in Lansing, Michigan. The small house with shelves stacked to the ceiling with books and papers. His father, a pioneer in computer science, always distant, always consumed. His mother, a teacher, filling the rooms with lessons and discipline. Knowledge surrounded him, but it was never gentle. It pressed against him like a weight, reminding him he had to do more, prove more, become more. In those quiet nights, listening to the low hum of machines his father tinkered with, Larry Page learned what obsession sounded like. And yet, obsession is lonely. At Stanford, when he first spoke of his idea, a system to rank the world's information, not by keywords, but by importance, by the invisible threads of links between them, he was met with polite nods, forced smiles. Some professors dismissed it as academic nonsense. Search engines exist, they told him. Why try to build another? They could not see what he saw, that the existing ones were blind, clumsy, crawling through the digital ocean without direction. He wanted to give the web a spine. He found only one person who listened without judgment. Sergey Brin. Loud where Larry was silent, reckless where Larry was cautious, Sergey was the spark to his shadow. Together, they were not balanced, they were combustible. But combustion is never safe. In the first nights working together, the air between them was electric and tense. They fought. Over lines of code, over equations, over visions. Their arguments rattled the walls of their cramped office like storms. Yet underneath every fight was respect. Respect born from recognizing another soul, unwilling to accept mediocrity. Still, the risk was unbearable. They were broke, living off stipends and the scraps of graduate life. Larry's parents could not fund him. The university could barely tolerate the bandwidth his experiment devoured. Servers crashed, hard drives overheated. He scavenged old computers, stacked them like corpses, wiring them together in desperate attempts to keep his creation alive. There were nights he stared at the blinking lights, wondering if he was building a machine or digging his own grave. The silence of failure was always there. That whisper in the back of his mind, what if no one cares? What if it all dies here, in this room forgotten? There was humiliation, too. Investors turned them away. Professors questioned the point. Friends drifted off into careers that looked like progress, while Larry remained in the shadows, clinging to an idea so fragile it could shatter with one wrong turn. The loneliness was suffocating. Even Sergey, for all his bravado, sometimes wondered aloud if they were wasting their youth on a delusion. But then came the first spark of victory, a small one. Students began using their search engine. Word spread across campus. They didn't advertise. They didn't need to. People whispered, "Have you tried this new search? It actually works." The whispers grew louder. Their server groaned under the weight of sudden attention. And for the first time, Larry felt the air shift. It wasn't triumph. Not yet. It was survival. The fragile kind of victory that tastes sweet but leaves your stomach hollow. Because now the stakes were higher. If they failed, it would not be in silence. It would be in public, under the eyes of those who had begun to believe. Larry knew the path ahead was darker than the one behind. Success meant responsibility. It meant more hunger, more machines, more money they did not have. Each step forward threatened to collapse everything they had built. And yet he could not stop. Obsession had already consumed him. In the dead of night, sitting once again in that small room, Larry stared at the glow of his creation. His fingers trembled above the keyboard. The world outside was silent, but inside his mind, the noise was unbearable. He thought of his father, gone too soon, never to see what he was building. He thought of the professors who doubted him, the investors who laughed, the endless nights of scavenging parts from forgotten labs. And then he thought of the billions of pages waiting to be ordered, waiting to be given meaning. A web without order was chaos, and chaos demanded control. He pressed the keys, and the machine answered. The machine responded with silence at first, then with speed, faster than anything else alive in that digital wilderness. It crawled across the web with an eerie precision, collecting, sorting, ranking. And with every query it answered, Larry felt a part of himself slip further into the void. This was no longer a project. It was a living thing. But living things need to feed. The servers they'd scavenged rattled like bones in a coffin. Hard drives screamed. Wires overheated. The dorm walls could no longer contain the monster they'd built. Stanford's administrators complained that their experiments were draining bandwidth, choking the campus network. Larry barely heard them. He was consumed by the rhythm of numbers, the echo of data folding into order. Sergey shouted at him to sleep, but Larry's eyes refused to close. He couldn't rest. Not now. Not when the world was beginning to knock on their door. Still, the shadows never left. For every student who whispered praise, there was a skeptic waiting to dismiss them. Search engines are just a commodity, they said. No one makes money from them. No one needs another one. Investors sneered. Industry giants turned away. They had built something extraordinary, and yet it looked worthless. And then came the nights of despair. Nights when even Sergey's optimism cracked, when the weight of rejection pressed too heavily on their shoulders. Larry sat alone, staring at his reflection in the darkened monitor. He saw not a visionary, not a builder. He saw a man wasting his youth chasing smoke. A man destined to vanish like so many others before him. But somewhere inside him burned the memory of his father. The silence of rooms filled with machines. The weight of unfinished work. Larry refused to let the silence win. When they scraped together enough courage to approach potential investors again, humiliation followed. They were offered to sell, not their idea, but themselves, for scraps, to work under others, to bury their obsession inside someone else's machine. Sergey bristled. Larry stayed silent. Inside, the rage built. If he surrendered now, he would not just be selling a company. He would be selling the very wound that drove him, the proof that obsession was worth something. So they refused. And for a moment, the world moved on without them. But obsession has a way of bending reality. The first real breakthrough came not from triumph, but from desperation. An angel investor, impressed more by their relentless conviction than by their business plan, wrote them a check, a small one, barely enough to keep the monster alive. But to Larry, it was oxygen. They could buy servers that wouldn't collapse under pressure. They could dream bigger. And with that fragile lifeline, their creation leapt from the shadows of Stanford into the wider world. Suddenly, it wasn't just students who whispered. It was journalists, entrepreneurs, the first murmurs of fear from established giants. A ripple had started. Larry felt the ripple inside him, too. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine the possibility that they might not be forgotten, that their names might not vanish into the noise. But even in that fragile victory, he felt no peace, because the ripple was also a warning. Success doesn't end silence. It amplifies it. The higher they climbed, the louder the doubts became. Could they survive? Could they make money? Could they scale? Every step forward carved deeper scars into Larry's quiet soul. He was no longer just coding in the dark. He was carrying the weight of a future he could not yet see. And then came the turning point. A major investor, finally convinced, gave them a chance. Money flowed. The monster they had built grew teeth, grew muscle, grew impossible to ignore. Google, they called it. A word simple enough for anyone to speak, strange enough to never be forgotten. But names mean nothing without survival. The pressure intensified. Teams expanded. The servers multiplied like shadows in the night. The demands were endless. For Sergey, the chaos was thrilling. For Larry, it was suffocating. He saw not triumph, but risk. Not success, but the endless possibility of collapse. He walked through the halls of their small office at night, long after everyone else had gone home. The whirring of machines surrounded him, a chorus of restless voices. He touched the servers, felt their vibrations through his fingertips, as if he were holding the pulse of something alive, something that could one day consume the world. In those moments, the silence returned. The silence of his father's absence. The silence of failure waiting just beyond the edge of light. He knew no matter how high they climbed, that silence would never disappear. It would only grow louder, waiting for the day everything crumbled. And yet, he pressed on, because the alternative was unthinkable. When the first major press articles declared Google the future of search, when the user numbers exploded, when the whispers turned into shouts, Larry Page did not celebrate. He did not smile. He stared into the distance, hollow-eyed, knowing that this was not the end. It was only the beginning of a darker climb. People would call him a visionary. They would paint him as a genius who saw the future before anyone else. But Larry knew the truth. He wasn't chosen. He wasn't destined. He was haunted. Haunted by the unbearable idea of wasting his life. Haunted by the silence of failure. Haunted by the ghost of a father who never saw what he could become. And so, every victory tasted like ash. The first risk, the first rejection, the first fragile victory, they were not just memories. They were scars. And scars do not fade. They stay, whispering in the dark, reminding you of the nights when no one believed, when no one cared, when the world threatened to erase you. Even now, with millions of users and the first signs of global recognition, Larry Page carried the same doubt that had always lived inside him. What if it all vanishes? What if tomorrow the world stops caring? What if I was wrong? The silence never leaves, and maybe that is the price. The price of building something that changes the world. The price of taking the first step when no one believes. The price of refusing to surrender to obscurity. Larry Page paid it, in sleepless nights, in failure, in loneliness. And because of that price, the world was changed forever. But deep inside, even as the servers roared, even as Google rose, Larry still carried the same question that haunted him in the dark of that dorm room. A question that never found an answer. What if I had given up?